In the beginning of Abram's journey, we are faced with an extraordinary event that would shape the course of religious history. In Ur of the Chaldeans, a prosperous city of antiquity, God revealed himself to Abram with a divine call that would transcend generations. This crucial moment marks the beginning of a narrative that would span millennia, influencing the beliefs and practices of countless people around the world. The divine command was clear and direct. Abram was to leave his homeland, his relatives and his father's house, to go to an unknown land that God would show him. This seemingly simple instruction carried profound implications. Ur of the Chaldeans, located in the region of Mesopotamia, was an advanced urban center for its time, full of opportunities and comforts. Leaving it meant renouncing security and familiarity in favor of the uncertain and unknown. However, the divine call was not limited to a mere geographical change. God presented Abram with a grand promise: "I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and you will be a blessing." This declaration established the foundation for a covenant that would extend through generations, shaping the destiny not only of Abram, but of all his descendants. It is important to note that the concept of great nation in the context of the time did not merely refer to numbers or a territorial extent. It encompassed the idea of a people united by ties of kinship, culture, and, more significantly, by a common faith. God was essentially inviting Abram to become the progenitor of a lineage that would carry a unique spiritual mission. The divine promise extended beyond personal blessing to Abram. "In you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed," God declared, indicating that the impact of this call would surpass the limits of a single family or nation. This statement foreshadows the central role that Abram's descendants would play in world religious history, influencing the three major monotheistic religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The act of leaving Ur of the Chaldeans represented more than a simple migration. It was a symbolic gesture of separation from the predominant polytheistic practices of the region in favor of a new way of relating to the divine. Abram was being called to break with the religious traditions of his time and embark on a journey of monotheistic faith, a revolutionary concept for that era. Abram's response to the divine call is noteworthy. The scriptures report that Abram departed as the Lord had commanded him. This immediate and unquestioning obedience demonstrates extraordinary faith, especially considering the magnitude of what was being asked of him. Abram was not only leaving behind his homeland, but was also embarking on a journey whose final destination was unknown. It is relevant to consider the historical context in which this call occurred. It is estimated that these events unfolded around the second millennium before the Common Era. At that time, traveling long distances was a dangerous and challenging endeavor. The roads were precarious, dangers were many, and leaving the protection of an established city like Ur was a decision that could not be taken lightly. Abram's call marks the beginning of a new paradigm in the relationship between the divine and the human. Until then, deities were often associated with specific places: a city, a mountain, a river. The God of Abram, however, reveals himself as a transcendent entity, not limited by geographical boundaries. This God would accompany Abram on his journey, establishing a personal and direct relationship. The promise of a land also deserves special attention. Although God did not immediately specify the final destination, the idea of a promised land would become central to the narrative of the Hebrew people. This land would not only be a place of residence, but a tangible symbol of the covenant between God and Abram's descendants. The divine call to Abram serves as a turning point in the biblical narrative. It marks the transition from universal stories, such as creation and the flood, to a more focused narrative centered on a specific family and its relationship with God. This narrowing of the narrative focus does not diminish the universality of the message. On the contrary, through Abram and his descendants, a universal message would be conveyed. It is fascinating to observe how this initial call establishes themes that permeate the entire subsequent biblical narrative. The idea of divine election, the importance of obedience to God's will, the concept of covenant, and the promise of blessing that extends beyond the individual to affect all humanity. Each of these themes finds its genesis in Abram's call and continues to resonate throughout the scriptures. Abram's response to the divine call serves as a model of faith for future generations. His willingness to leave the known for the unknown, trusting solely in God's word, is often cited as an example of authentic faith. This faith is not blind or irrational, but based on a deep trust in God's character and promises. Abram's call also sheds light on the concept of divine vocation. The idea that God calls individuals for specific purposes becomes a recurring theme in biblical narratives and continues to influence religious thought to this day. This initial call serves as a paradigm for understanding how God interacts with humanity, choosing individuals for crucial roles in His greater plan. Reflecting on Abram's call, we are invited to consider our own journey of faith. What are the of the Chaldeans in our lives, the places of comfort and familiarity that we may be called to leave? What divine promises motivate us to take steps of faith into the unknown? How can we, like Abram, respond with obedience to divine calls in our own lives? Abram's journey to Canaan, accompanied by his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, represents a fundamental chapter in the biblical narrative. This trip, far from being a simple migration, was marked by trials and challenges that tested the faith and resilience of the patriarch and his family. The journey from of the Chaldeans to the promised land of Canaan was not merely a geographical crossing, but a spiritual and transformative journey that would shape the destiny of future nations. By leaving the security and comfort of Abram embarked on an adventure filled with uncertainties. The road to Canaan was long and dangerous, traversing diverse and often hostile terrains. It is crucial to consider the historical context. At that time, estimated to be around the second millennium before the Common Era, traveling long distances was a risky endeavor. Caravans faced constant threats from bandits who saw travelers as easy targets for plunder. Additionally, natural dangers were abundant, from wild animals lurking in desolate regions to unpredictable weather conditions that could turn dry wadis into deadly torrents in a matter of minutes. Abram's decision to take his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot with him adds a layer of complexity to the journey. This demonstrates not only his sense of family responsibility, but also his understanding that the divine call was not just individual, but encompassed his entire household. This family dynamic would play a significant role in future events, both in the blessings and challenges they would face. The presence of Sarai in particular would be crucial at various points in the narrative, highlighting the important role of women in this patriarchal story. Abram's caravan was not small. The scriptures mention that he took with him all the goods they had acquired and the people they had acquired in Haran. This suggests a considerable group, including servants, herdsmen, and possibly other dependents. Managing a caravan of this size through unknown and potentially hostile territories was a monumental task, requiring leadership, diplomacy, and strategy skills. Upon arriving in Canaan, Abram and his entourage encountered a land already inhabited, with its own cultures, traditions, and belief systems. The biblical narrative mentions that at that time the Canaanites were living in the land. This observation is not merely historical, but highlights the challenge of establishing oneself in already occupied territory while maintaining fidelity to the divine call and the unique identity that this call implied. The Canaanites, with their city-states and polytheistic religious practices, represented a stark contrast to Abram's monotheistic faith. One of the first trials faced by Abram in his new land was famine. The scriptures report that there was a famine in that land. This natural event had profound consequences, forcing Abram to make difficult decisions to ensure the survival of his family and flocks. The famine was not just a subsistence crisis, but a test of faith. How to reconcile the promise of a bountiful land with the reality of scarcity. This episode raises important questions about the nature of divine promise and the reality of human life, subject to the vicissitudes of nature. Abram's response to the famine was pragmatic. He decided to go down to Egypt. This decision, though understandable from a survival standpoint, introduced new challenges and complications. Egypt, with its sophisticated culture and polytheistic religious system, presented both opportunities and dangers for Abram and his family. The contrast between Abram's nomadic life and the highly structured civilization of Egypt could not be more pronounced. Egypt, with its grand cities, imposing temples, and agriculture-based economy along the Nile, represented a completely different world from what Abram was accustomed to. The stay in Egypt is marked by a controversial episode, where Abram, fearing for his life, presents Sarai as his sister. This incident reveals the complexity of Abram's character. A man of great faith, but also subject to moments of weakness and poor judgment. It is a powerful reminder that even revered figures in religious traditions were human, with their own flaws and insecurities. Abram's decision to use this strategy of deception raises ethical questions that have been debated by scholars and theologians over the centuries. On one hand, one could argue that Abram was acting out of self-preservation in a hostile environment. On the other hand, his willingness to potentially compromise his wife's honor to save his own skin is problematic, especially in light of his divine calling. Despite these challenges, the biblical narrative emphasizes that Abram prospered materially during his stay in Egypt. He accumulated wealth in the form of cattle, silver, and gold. This enrichment, while positive in material terms, would bring its own complications, as seen later in the conflict between Abram's herdsmen and Lot. Abram's prosperity in Egypt can be seen as a partial fulfillment of the divine promise of blessing, but also as a test of his character and priorities. How would he manage this newly acquired wealth? Would it draw him away from his original calling, or would it be used in service of that calling? Abram's return to Canaan marks a new chapter in his journey. He returns not only as a richer man, but also with a deeper understanding of the challenges and responsibilities that accompany the divine call. The narrative describes him traveling through the Negev, a semi-arid region that serves as a symbolic transition between Egypt and the Promised Land. This crossing through the desert can be seen as a period of purification and reflection, a time for Abram to reassess his priorities and renew his commitment to the divine call. A significant aspect of this phase of Abram's journey is his return to the places where he had previously built altars. This suggests a renewal of his commitment to God, a reaffirmation of his faith after the trials faced in Egypt. It is a reminder that the spiritual journey often involves returns and new beginnings. The act of rebuilding or revisiting these altars was not just a religious gesture, but a public declaration of his faith and a reaffirmation of his identity as a follower of the one God in a land of many gods. The conflict that arises between Abram's herdsmen and Lot is an important turning point. This disagreement over limited resources, pastures, and water tests not only the family relationship, but also Abram's wisdom and character as a leader. His decision to offer Lot the choice of land demonstrates remarkable generosity and trust in divine provision. This episode illustrates the practical challenges faced by nomadic communities in a resource-scarce environment. Abram's decision to let Lot choose first reveals not only his generosity, but also his confidence in the divine promise. He was willing to forego what seemed to be the best part of the land, trusting that God would fulfill his promise regardless of immediate circumstances. The separation of Lot, who chooses the fertile plains of the Jordan, leaving Abram with the seemingly less desirable lands, is a moment of subtle yet profound testing. It is after this separation that God renews his promise to Abram, reaffirming the gift of the land and the promise of numerous descendants. This moment marks an important transition in the narrative. With Lot's departure, Abram becomes the sole focus of the divine promise. The renewal of the promise at this moment serves as a reminder that God's plan does not depend on human choices or apparent circumstances. Abram's journey in Canaan was not without external conflicts. The narrative mentions a war among local kings, during which Lot is captured. This episode, known as the War of Kings, deserves a more detailed analysis. The conflict involved a coalition of eastern kings, led by Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, against an alliance of kings from the Dead Sea region, including the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. This war reflects the complex politics of the region at the time, with shifting alliances and disputes over resources and trade routes. Lot's capture during this conflict puts Abram in a difficult position. Although they had separated, Lot was still part of his extended family, and Abram feels compelled to intervene. Abram's response to this crisis, gathering his men to rescue Lot, reveals another facet of his character, the courage and sense of family responsibility that lead him to risk himself for the sake of others. The rescue operation conducted by Abram is notable for several aspects. First, It demonstrates that Abram, despite his spiritual calling, was also a capable leader in military affairs. He gathers 318 trained men, born in his house, suggesting significant social and military organization within his clan. Abram's strategy of dividing his forces and attacking at night shows considerable tactical acumen. The success of Abram in this rescue mission is surprising, considering he faced a coalition of kings who had just defeated several city-states. This can be seen as an additional confirmation of divine favor upon Abram. In addition to rescuing Lot, Abram recovers all the goods and people that had been taken, including women and other captives. Abram's triumphant return from this military campaign marks the beginning of one of the most intriguing and theologically significant episodes in his story, the encounter with Melchisedek. This meeting occurs in the Valley of Shaveh, also known as the King's Valley, likely near Jerusalem. Melchisedek is presented as King of Salem, generally identified as Jerusalem, and priest of the Most High God. His sudden appearance in the narrative and his dual role as king and priest have intrigued scholars and theologians for millennia. The name Melchisedek means King of Righteousness, and his title as King of Salem, which means peace, adds a symbolic layer to his identity. The encounter between Abram and Melchisedek is brief, but deeply significant. Melchisedek offers bread and wine to Abram, a gesture that has been interpreted in various ways throughout history. Some see this as a simple act of hospitality, while others, especially in the Christian tradition, interpret it as a precursor to the sacrament of the Eucharist. Even more notable is the blessing that Melchisedek pronounces over Abram. "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." This blessing is significant for several reasons. First, it acknowledges Abram's victory as a divine act. Second, it identifies Abram's God with the Most High God, suggesting a continuity or universality in the understanding of the divine. Abram's response to Melchisedek is equally remarkable. He gives Melchisedek a tenth of everything. This act of offering a tithe of the spoils of war is interpreted as a recognition of Melchisedek's priestly authority and a way of thanking God for the victory. It is the first example of tithing mentioned in the Bible and establishes an important precedent for future religious practices. The theological significance of this encounter is broad and enduring. In the Jewish tradition, Melchisedek is often seen as an exemplar of justice and righteousness. In the Christian tradition, particularly in the Epistle to the Hebrews in the New Testament, Melchisedek is interpreted as a precursor to Christ, representing a superior and eternal priesthood. The contrast between Abram's encounter with Melchisedek and his subsequent interaction with the king of Sodom is instructive. While Abram accepts the blessing and offers a tithe to Melchisedek, he firmly declines the offer from the king of Sodom to keep the recovered goods. Abram declares, "I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and sworn that I will take nothing of yours, not a thread or a sandal strap, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich.'" This refusal demonstrates Abram's determination to attribute his success and prosperity solely to God, not to human favors. It also serves to distance Abram from the practices and values of Sodom, a city that would later be associated with extreme wickedness in the biblical narrative. Abram's journey in Canaan, marked by these dramatic events, the separation from Lot, the War of Kings, the rescue of Lot, and the encounter with Melchisedek, illustrates the ongoing development of his character and faith. Each episode presents new challenges and opportunities for Abram to demonstrate his trust in God and his understanding of the divine calling. These events also serve to establish Abram as a figure of regional significance. His military victory over the Eastern kings and his interactions with figures like Melchisedek and the king of Sodom position him as a respected and powerful leader. However, this position of respect and power brings with it new challenges and responsibilities. The subsequent narrative shows Abram grappling with the implications of his newfound status as he continues to navigate the complex political and spiritual landscape of Canaan. An important aspect of Abram's journey in Canaan is his ongoing interaction with the local population. Although the biblical narrative focuses primarily on Abram and his family, it is essential to remember that they were not operating in a vacuum. The lands of Canaan were inhabited by various tribes and peoples, each with their own traditions, beliefs, and social structures. Abram's ability to maintain peaceful relations with these groups, while preserving his distinct identity and unique faith, is a testament to his diplomatic skill and wisdom. The nomadic life of Abram in Canaan also provides insights into the pastoral practices of the time. Seasonal movement in search of pastures and water was essential for the survival of herds. This practice not only shaped the lifestyle of Abram and his family, but also influenced their interactions with the sedentary communities of the region. The need to negotiate access to water resources, for example, was a constant reality that required diplomatic skills and sometimes strategic alliances. The growth of Abram's wealth and influence during this period is remarkable. The scriptures mention that he was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. This material prosperity, viewed in the context of divine promise, can be interpreted as a tangible sign of God's favor. However, it also presented unique challenges. How could Abram maintain his dependence on God and focus on the divine calling amid material abundance? This tension between prosperity and spirituality is a theme that resonates throughout the biblical narrative and remains relevant today. Abram's experience in Canaan is also marked by moments of deep communion with God. The narrative mentions several occasions when God speaks directly to Abram, renewing his promises and offering guidance. These divine encounters serve not only to reaffirm Abram's calling, but also to deepen his understanding of God's character and purposes. It is through these interactions that the concept of covenant between God and Abram, and by extension his descendants, is developed and solidified. A fascinating aspect of Abram's journey in Canaan is the development of his faith. Although he demonstrated great obedience in leaving Ur, his faith is continually tested and refined through experiences in Canaan. The promise of a land and a numerous offspring seems, at many moments, to be in direct conflict with the reality that Abram faces. The land is occupied by other peoples, and Abram and Sarai remain childless. This tension between promise and reality is a central theme in Abram's narrative and serves as a powerful example of persevering faith in the face of adversity. Abram's relationship with Sarai also deserves special attention during this period. Although the primary focus of the narrative is on Abram, Sarai plays a crucial role in his journey. The couple's inability to have children, especially in a culture that greatly valued offspring, is a constant source of tension and sorrow. The way Abram and Sarai navigate this difficulty, including the controversial episode involving Hagar, the Egyptian servant, reveals much about the complexities of family relationships and social pressures of the time. The episode of Sodom and Gomorrah, while primarily focused on Lot, also sheds light on Abram's character. His intercession before God on behalf of the condemned cities demonstrates a profound compassion and a sense of moral responsibility that transcends family ties. This incident also serves to contrast Abram's righteousness with the wickedness of the cities of the plain, reinforcing his role as a channel of blessing amid a morally corrupt world. As Abram ages in Canaan, the issue of succession and inheritance becomes increasingly pressing. The promise of numerous descendants seems more and more unlikely, given the advanced age of Abram and Sarai. This apparent impasse leads to moments of doubt and human attempts to help the divine plan, as seen in the birth of Ishmael through Hagar. These events highlight the tension between faith in divine promise and the human desire for control and certainty. Abram's journey in Canaan is, in many respects, a journey of transformation. He enters the land as Abram, an obedient but still uncertain nomad, and emerges as Abraham, the patriarch of a new nation and the bearer of a divine covenant. This transformation is not merely nominal, but reflects a profound change in his identity and purpose. In conclusion, Abram's journey to and through Canaan is much more than a simple narrative of migration and settlement. It is a story of tested and refined faith, of divine promises confronted with earthly realities, and of an ordinary man being shaped for an extraordinary destiny. Abram's experiences in Canaan, his trials, his triumphs, his encounters with the divine and the human, form the foundation not only for the subsequent story of Israel, but also for the monotheistic traditions that would shape much of world history. Abram's journey in Canaan thus remains a powerful testimony to the interaction between the divine and the human, and a lasting example of faith and perseverance in the face of uncertainty and adversity. The establishment of the covenant between God and Abram, accompanied by the change of their names, marks a crucial turning point in the biblical narrative. This event not only solidifies the relationship between the divine and the human, but also establishes the foundations for a new collective identity that would shape the history of entire nations. The covenant, in its historical and cultural context, was more than a mere agreement. It was a solemn pact, often sealed with specific rituals, that created bonds almost familial between the parties involved. In Abram's case, this covenant is particularly noteworthy for being established between a human being and the divine, elevating it to a level of transcendental significance. The moment of the covenant is preceded by a period of doubt and questioning on Abram's part. Despite his previous experiences with God, the reality of his situation, still without an heir and living as a foreigner in a promised but unpossessed land, weighed heavily on him. This human and relatable context makes the establishment of the covenant even more powerful, highlighting the contrast between human frailty and the greatness of divine promises. The covenant ceremony, as described in the scriptures, is rich in symbolism. God instructs Abram to prepare various animals, cutting them in half. This ritual, known as cutting a covenant, was a common practice in antiquity. The parties to the agreement would pass between the halves of the animals, symbolically invoking a similar fate upon themselves should they break the pact. However, in this case, it is God who passes between the parts, represented by a smoking torch and a flaming furnace, while Abram is in a deep sleep. This unilateral passing of God emphasizes the unconditional nature of the covenant. It depends entirely on divine faithfulness, not on human actions. The promises made in this covenant are comprehensive and far-reaching. God promises Abram not only a numerous offspring, but also the possession of the land of Canaan. Moreover, there is the promise that through Abram, all nations of the earth would be blessed. This last promise is particularly significant, as it extends the scope of the covenant beyond Abram's direct descendants, potentially encompassing all of humanity. A crucial aspect of this covenant is the change of names. Abram, which means exalted father, becomes Abraham, father of many. This change is not merely semantic, but represents a profound transformation of identity and destiny. Abraham's new name is both a promise and a responsibility. He will carry with him, in his own name, the constant reminder of the divine covenant and his role as the progenitor of a great nation. Similarly, Sarai becomes Sarah. While the exact meaning of this change is less clear in the scriptures, it is generally interpreted as a transition from my princess to simply princess, possibly indicating an expansion of her role and influence beyond the immediate family sphere. This name change for Sarah is significant, as it explicitly includes her in the divine promise, emphasizing her crucial role in the fulfillment of God's plan. The promise of a child to Abraham and Sarah, made in this context, acquires a new level of significance. It is not just the promise of an heir for an elderly childless couple, but the assurance of the continuity of a divine covenant that would extend for generations. Abraham's initial reaction to this promise, laughing in disbelief, is a human touch that highlights the magnitude of the divine promise in the face of apparent reality. The establishment of circumcision as a sign of the covenant is another crucial element of this event. This physical ritual serves as a constant and tangible reminder of the pact between God and Abraham's people. Circumcision, performed on the 8th day after birth, incorporates each new male generation into the covenant, creating a physical and spiritual continuity over time. It is important to note that while the covenant is primarily established with Abraham, it is not exclusive. The narrative emphasizes that circumcision must be performed not only on Abraham's direct descendants, but also on the servants born in his house and those purchased with money. This inclusion of non-relatives in the covenant suggests a broader and more inclusive understanding of the faith community, transcending purely blood ties. The name change and the establishment of the covenant also mark a transition in the relationship between Abraham and God. Previous interactions were primarily characterized by divine commands and promises, with Abraham as a relatively passive receiver. From this point on, we see Abraham taking a more active role, including interceding with God on behalf of others, as in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah. This evolution suggests a deepening of intimacy and trust between the human and the divine. The impact of this covenant extends far beyond Abraham's life. It becomes the foundation of the identity of the Hebrew people, and later of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. The idea of being a chosen people with a specific divine purpose deeply shapes the self-understanding and history of these faith communities. The promise of a specific land as part of the covenant also has far-reaching implications. It establishes a spiritual and emotional connection with the land of Canaan that endures to this day, influencing not only religious issues, but also political and geopolitical ones. It is fascinating to consider how this covenant, established with an individual in a specific historical context, came to have such a lasting and comprehensive impact. Abraham's transformation from a landless, childless nomad to the patriarch of a new religious tradition is a powerful testimony to the interaction between the divine and the human in the biblical narrative. The covenant with Abraham also introduces theological themes that would be developed throughout the biblical tradition. The idea of divine election, the tension between promise and fulfillment, the concept of faith as trust in yet-to-be-fulfilled promises. All these themes find their genesis in this crucial event. Furthermore, the covenant with Abraham establishes a pattern for future divine covenants in the biblical narrative. Subsequent covenants with Noah, Moses, and David, for example, follow a similar pattern of divine promise, physical sign, and human obligations. Each of these covenants builds on the foundation established with Abraham, expanding and refining the understanding of the relationship between God and humanity. The name change of Abraham and Sarah also serves as a powerful reminder of the divine capacity to transform and redefine human identity. This theme of personal transformation through encounter with the divine becomes recurrent in the biblical narrative and subsequent religious traditions. It is important to note that while the covenant is presented as eternal and unconditional, it does not exempt Abraham and his descendants from moral responsibility. On the contrary, the covenant implies a call to righteousness and obedience. The subsequent narrative shows how the people of the covenant often struggle to live up to their responsibilities, creating a dynamic tension between divine grace and human responsibility that permeates much of Jewish and Christian theology. The promise of blessing for all nations through Abraham is particularly significant in its historical context. In a world of tribal and national gods, the idea of a universal God concerned with all nations was revolutionary. This promise lays the groundwork for a more inclusive and universal understanding of divinity that would develop over the following centuries. In conclusion, the covenant with Abraham and the change of his name represent a pivotal moment in the biblical narrative and religious history. This event not only redefines the identity and destiny of an individual, but also establishes the foundations for a new understanding of the relationship between the divine and the human. The covenant with Abraham, with its far-reaching promises and its lasting physical sign, continues to shape the self-understanding and practices of faith communities around the world, demonstrating the enduring power of a promise made millennia ago to a nomad in the ancient Near East. The birth of Isaac and the subsequent test of Abraham's faith represent a climax in the patriarch's narrative, intertwining themes of fulfilled promise, unexpected joy, and radical obedience. This episode, rich in symbolism and theological implications, continues to intrigue and challenge readers and scholars to this day. The birth of Isaac, long promised and seemingly impossible, occurs when Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90. This miraculous event is the literal fulfillment of the divine promise, a testament to God's faithfulness and the persevering faith of Abraham and Sarah. The name Isaac, which means he laughs, is a direct reference to his parents' initial reaction of disbelief and then joy at the promise of his birth. The arrival of Isaac is more than just the addition of a new family member. It represents the tangible realization of the covenant between God and Abraham. Through this son, the promise of a great nation would begin to materialize. Isaac's late and unlikely birth serves as a powerful reminder that God's ways often challenge human expectations and limitations. The joy accompanying Isaac's birth is palpable in the narrative. Sarah exclaims, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." This statement is not just an expression of personal happiness, but a public testimony to the power and grace of God. The laughter, which was previously one of disbelief, now becomes a symbol of joyful surprise at God's work. However, Isaac's arrival also brings complications to the family dynamic. The presence of Ishmael, Abraham's son with Hagar, creates tensions that ultimately lead to the expulsion of Hagar and Ishmael. This painful episode illustrates the complexities and consequences of human attempts to help the divine plan, and serves as a reminder of the far-reaching ramifications of our decisions. It is in this context of fulfilled promise and family joy that one of the most challenging and controversial episodes of the biblical narrative occurs. Abraham's test of faith, often referred to as the sacrifice of Isaac. God commands Abraham to offer Isaac as a sacrifice, a demand that seems to directly contradict previous promises and challenges not only Abraham's paternal love, but also his understanding of God's character. Abraham's response to this command is remarkable for its readiness and apparent lack of questioning. He rises early the next morning and sets out with Isaac for the designated place of sacrifice. This immediate obedience is often interpreted as a sign of Abraham's deep trust in God, even in the face of an apparently incomprehensible and morally troubling command. The 3-day journey to Mount Moriah is filled with dramatic tension. The dialogue between Abraham and Isaac, especially Isaac's innocent question about the lamb for the sacrifice, and Abraham's enigmatic response, "God will provide for himself the lamb," adds a layer of pathos to the narrative. These words of Abraham are often interpreted as an expression of prophetic faith, anticipating the divine intervention that would come. The climax of the narrative occurs at the moment Abraham raises the knife to sacrifice Isaac. It is at this critical instant that the divine voice intervenes, stopping Abraham's hand and providing a ram as a substitute for the sacrifice. This dramatic intervention not only saves Isaac's life, but also establishes a fundamental principle in Jewish theology, and later, Christian theology: the rejection of human sacrifice and the affirmation of the value of human life in God's eyes. The interpretation of this episode has been the subject of intense theological and ethical debate over the centuries. Some see it as the supreme example of faith and obedience, while others question the morality of a God who would require such an act. Regardless of interpretation, the event serves as a focal point for reflections on the nature of faith, the limits of religious obedience, and God's character. It is important to note that in the biblical narrative, this event is explicitly described as a test. God never intended for Abraham to actually sacrifice Isaac. The purpose was to prove and refine Abraham's faith. This perspective raises fascinating questions about the nature of divine tests and the role of suffering and trials in spiritual development. God's response to Abraham's obedience is a reaffirmation and expansion of previous promises. God declares, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will greatly multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." This declaration not only reaffirms the previous promises of numerous descendants and blessing for all nations, but intensifies them. Abraham's obedience in this supreme test is presented as the reason why God now swears by himself, elevating the covenant to a new level of solemnity and irrevocability. The impact of this event on the lives of Abraham and Isaac is profound and lasting. For Abraham, it represents the pinnacle of his faith journey, a final demonstration of his total trust in God. For Isaac, the experience must have been traumatic and transformative, shaping his own understanding of God and his role in the covenant. This episode also establishes a pattern of almost sacrifice that resonates throughout the biblical narrative and beyond. In the Christian tradition, for example, it is often seen as a foreshadowing of the sacrifice of Jesus, with God the Father willing to offer His only Son for the salvation of humanity. In conclusion, the birth of Isaac and Abraham's test of faith represent a dramatic climax in the patriarchal narrative. These events intertwine themes of fulfilled promise, radical obedience, and covenant renewal. They continue to challenge and inspire, offering fertile ground for reflections on the nature of faith, God's character, and the often mysterious ways in which the divine interacts with the human. Abraham's legacy and his death mark the closing of an extraordinary life that left an indelible mark on the religious and cultural history of humanity. This final chapter of the patriarch's life is characterized by a mix of personal achievements, family arrangements, and the establishment of a lasting legacy that would transcend generations. In the years following the test of faith on Mount Moriah, Abraham continued to play his role as the leader of his clan and a patriarchal figure. One of the significant events of this period was arranging Isaac's marriage. The search for a wife for his son was not just a matter of ensuring family continuity, but also of preserving the purity of the chosen lineage and maintaining faithfulness to the divine covenant. Abraham sends his most trusted servant back to his homeland, Haran, with the specific mission of finding a wife for Isaac among his relatives. This decision reflects Abraham's concern to maintain his family's cultural and religious identity, avoiding marital alliances with the local Canaanites. The servant's providential encounter with Rebekah at the well, and her subsequent acceptance to become Isaac's wife, is seen as a divine confirmation of the choice. The marriage of Isaac and Rebekah is not just a family event, but a crucial link in the continuation of the covenant. Through this union, the promise of a great nation continues to unfold. The biblical narrative devotes considerable attention to this event, highlighting its importance in the divine plan. In his later years, Abraham had the joy of seeing the birth of his grandsons, Esau and Jacob, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. This event marks the partial fulfillment of the divine promise of numerous descendants. Seeing the third generation of his family was not only a personal blessing for Abraham, but a tangible sign of the ongoing fulfillment of God's covenant. Abraham's longevity is remarkable even by the standards of the time. Scriptures report that he lived to be 175 years old. This long life is often interpreted as a sign of divine favor, allowing Abraham to witness the beginning of the fulfillment of the promises made to him decades earlier. Abraham's death is described in the Scriptures with a dignified simplicity. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. This description conveys a sense of completeness and satisfaction, suggesting that Abraham departed this life with the awareness of having fulfilled his divine purpose. Abraham's funeral is a significant moment of family reunion. Isaac and Ishmael, long separated sons, come together to bury their father in the cave of Machpelah, the same place where Sarah had been buried years earlier. This act of posthumous reconciliation between the brothers is a testimony to the unifying power of Abraham's legacy, even beyond his death. However, Abraham's legacy goes far beyond his immediate family. He is recognized as the patriarch of the three major monotheistic religions of the world: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Each of these faith traditions traces its spiritual lineage back to Abraham, seeing him as a model of faith, obedience, and relationship with the divine. In Judaism, Abraham is revered as the first patriarch, the man with whom God established the covenant that would define the Jewish people. His willingness to leave his homeland in obedience to the divine call and his unwavering faith, even in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances, establish him as the archetype of a faithful follower of God. For Christianity, Abraham is seen as the father of all who believe, as the Apostle Paul describes him in the letter to the Romans. His faith is presented as a model for Christians, and the promise that through him all nations would be blessed is interpreted as a foreshadowing of the universal salvation offered through Jesus Christ. In Islam, Abraham, known as Ibrahim, is honored as one of the great prophets and as an example of total submission to God. Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, in Islamic tradition generally identified as Ishmael, is commemorated annually during the festival of Eid al-Adha. The impact of Abraham on world history goes beyond the religious. The idea of ethical monotheism, which he personifies, has had profound philosophical, ethical, and social implications that have shaped entire civilizations. The conception of a universal God, concerned with the moral conduct of humanity, has influenced legal systems, social structures, and ethical understandings worldwide. Abraham's legacy also manifests geographically. The land of Canaan, promised to him and his descendants, remains a focal point of religious devotion and, unfortunately, geopolitical conflict to this day. The spiritual connection to this land, established through the promise to Abraham, continues to shape the aspirations and identities of millions of people. Abraham's life, from his initial calling in Ur to his death in Canaan, serves as a powerful narrative of personal transformation and divine purpose. His journey of faith, with its ups and downs, victories and failures, offers a rich and complex model of spiritual life that continues to resonate with people thousands of years later. Ultimately, Abraham's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of faith and promise. His life demonstrates how one individual's obedience to a divine call can have repercussions that echo through the centuries, shaping the course of human history and the understanding of the relationship between the divine and the human. Abraham's death, therefore, does not mark the end of his influence, but rather the beginning of a legacy that would continue to grow and expand long beyond his earthly life. Through his physical and spiritual descendants, Abraham's vision of a unique and universal God, and of a humanity united in faith and purpose, continues to inspire and challenge people to this day. Thus, the narrative of Abraham, from his calling to his legacy, remains a powerful testimony of the interaction between the divine and the human, a lasting example of faith, obedience, and purpose that continues to shape the spiritual and ethical understanding of billions of people around the world. The story of Abraham is much more than just an ancient tale. It is a true treasure of wisdom and inspiration that remains relevant today. But what will you do with all this knowledge? Think about it. Abraham faced enormous challenges, left everything behind, and embarked on an uncertain journey, guided only by his faith. And you? What Ur of the Chaldeans do you need to leave behind in your life? What comfort zone is holding you back from reaching your true potential? Perhaps it's that job that no longer satisfies you, or that toxic relationship that you know needs to end. Or maybe it's that dream you've been postponing for years, afraid to take the risk. Abraham's story teaches us that sometimes, in order to grow, we need to take a leap of faith. And what about Abraham's perseverance? Even when everything seemed impossible, he kept believing. How many times have you given up on something because it seemed too difficult? What if you had persevered just a little longer? Who knows where you would be now? Remember, Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. 100 years. If that isn't proof that it's never too late for your dreams to come true, I don't know what is. So how about taking that project out of the drawer? Starting that course you've always wanted? It's never too late to start over. And what about Abraham's test of faith? Of course, no one is asking you to sacrifice anything so drastic, but how about starting to trust your own path more? Sometimes, things don't make sense right away, but trust and perseverance can lead to surprising results. Abraham's legacy shows us the impact a single life can have. His actions have echoed for millennia and influenced billions of people. And you? What legacy do you want to leave? How do you want to be remembered? It doesn't have to be something grand. Sometimes small acts of kindness and courage can have a huge impact. So, what will you do from now on? Will you continue as you are, or will you be inspired by Abraham's journey to take the next step in your own journey? How about starting today? Grab a piece of paper and a pen and list 3 things you've always wanted to do but never had the courage to try. Choose one of them and take the first step, no matter how small, still this week. And remember, just as Abraham was not alone on his journey, you are not either. There's a whole community here, ready to support and inspire you. Why not share your plans and dreams in the comments? Who knows how many people you can inspire with your own journey? And hey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We have a lot more amazing content coming your way, exploring fascinating stories like Abraham's, and discovering how we can apply them in our lives today. Together, we can create our own legacy of faith, courage, and positive impact on the world. So, what are you waiting for? Your journey starts now.